So the world has been made and shaped by the optimists of the past. I like to think of technology as the seventh kingdom of life. It's like Superman. You can imagine it, but it doesn't mean you can have superpowers. If you do actually have different species, then there is us in them. And that is a very terrifying thought.
What will the world look like in 100 years? What about 1,000 or 1,000,000 years from now? While we can't know the future, we can say with some certainty that technology will play a huge part in it. Big questions, no easy answers. Dive into the mysteries of the universe with Unknowns. From the secrets of the Big Bang to the future of humanity. Discover what we still don't know. Tune in and explore the unknown. Hi, I'm Kim Lochner and I'll be your Unknowns guide. Our host is David Christian, a historian, the founder of Big History, and the host of the Unknowns podcast. Our guest today is Kevin Kelly, a futurist and senior maverick for Wired magazine. Kevin's worn many hats over his career, including travel writer, novelist, photographer, lecturer, artist, optimist, and author. Kevin, how did you become fascinated with the history of technology?
I came to technology reluctantly. I was a hippie that kind of took the prevailing view of keeping technology at arm's length, like not really wanting to do anything with it. Instead of, I dropped out of college and went to Asia where I mingled with people who had very little technology. I was deliberately trying to keep myself from technology, and I began to, when I wanted to make some money, to write about travel because I was really good at traveling. I made a little business that needed some typesetting, and I was borrowing one of the first computers at the laboratory that I was working in to generate the text for my little business. I had to use a modem to transmit the stuff that I typed to somewhere to get it printed. And I discovered that at the other end of the modem was this emerging world that we now know of as the online world. But at that time, there really wasn't that term. You had to use the telephone line, and you had squawking sound, and you had only text. But I felt suddenly this was a different kind of technology. This was something that was much more organic, much more about communication, much more about communities, much more about people. And I became really interested in it, and I started to immerse myself in it. And I wrote a piece in 1984 about this as if it was a new country, as if I was traveling to this place. Looking at the technology there, I became more sympathetic to technology. And then this was the beginning of this digital internet stuff. And my interest in technology came from that side, from having experienced something that didn't feel steely, it didn't feel like a smokestack, it didn't feel like big things that we normally think of until that time as technology. People didn't talk about technology as cool. Technology was not cool in the 50s and 60s. It was a source of problems. It was what you were trying to avoid. It only became cool later through our efforts at Wired, where we were trying to make the people making this new technology. So tech now has a very positive association. It was not really that positive in the 50s and the 60s when I was growing up. So I came to it through the eyes of this digital world and the intangible aspects of it. And that forced me to look at what was going on with technology. And the other defining moment came when I attended the first Artificial Life Conference at Los Alamos in 89, I think it was, and 1989. And there again, it was a very different way of thinking things, where people were looking at biological processes and understanding that you could import them or bring them into technological systems, like bringing evolution and having artificial evolution or artificial life or artificial replication. And that was the other instigating insight that, the differences between the technological world and the biological world may not be as sharp as I thought. And as I researched more into the people who were trying to make mechanical system more biological at the same time as biologists who were trying to engineer biology, I came to the realization that there are really two sides of the same thing. And that would be sort of leaning towards my awareness of what technology really was. And so that's how I came to it. I came to it from my own experience in touching a technology that for the first time seemed to be more organic, and then encountering all these researchers who were understanding that the principles underneath biological systems were actually much more universal than just within biology.
We live in quite remarkable times. Our species, that is to say, human beings, has produced such remarkable and powerful technologies that the fate of an entire planet will be shaped by what we do actually for millions of years. Now, no species in almost 4 billion years has shown anything like the sort of technological creativity that we humans show. It's not just things, it's ways of organizing society, ways of thinking about ethics and so on. So what is it about us that makes us so different? And also, what do we really mean by technology? Can you offer a kind of quick and nasty definition of technology for us?
For me, in the most abstract way, the origins of technology is actually at the Big Bang, and that it is an extension and acceleration of the same self-organizing force that has run from the beginning of the Big Bang, where most of the universe is running down, has more entropy, it's coming to some uniform grayness. There is this thread, this pocket that runs uphill, that is increasing in its order, and that it's increasing in its complexity. And that self-organizing, self-created force runs through the planets and organizes planetary systems, organizes even galaxies at a certain level. It organizes our own planet and is particularly present in life as it compounds itself over time, and especially in our minds, in our intelligence, and therefore in our own technology. So I see what's happening with technology as an extension of that very long force, that arc, the cosmological passage through time. I kind of like to think of technology as the seventh kingdom of life. Again, it's accelerating that little process of innovation and learning that evolution does in the abstract way of filling different possibilities and exploring the space of possibilities. And technology is doing that. And I would describe technology as not only an extension of that, but it's anything that minds or brains produce. In a certain sense, I think the nest of a bird is a technological thing. It came from their mind. It was engineered by them. There isn't the same kind of deliberateness or consciousness. I would say that the definition of technologies is stuff that comes out of minds and brains, and itself, all of that is an extension of the same forces that has made life and all the species on this planet. And so it's very much aligned with life. It's not antagonistic to it. It's not in opposition to it. It's actually an extension of it and an acceleration of it.
Gee, that's a wonderful big history answer to what we mean by technology, because it fits in with a central theme of big history, which is this idea of a universe which, as you say, is basically running down, but in which there are areas, sort of astonishing areas, where the opposite seems to be happening. And technology is part of that process. I believe it was your first book, had the title, What Technology Wants. Now, you've already sort of touched on this, but I've always found that title a bit mysterious, and I'm wondering if you can explain, if you can unpack this mystery of technology seeming to want something.
Right now, we have a very complicated system of technology in general, where it takes a hammer to make a saw, and it takes a saw to make a hammer. And we have a very interdependent web, an ecosystem of all these different technologies supporting each other. And as smart as any of us might be, none of us would be able to make this mouse, which is about the same size as a stone tool of Neanderthal. Nobody, a single person of us, or even a small group, is probably likely able to make this. So you need a laser printer, you need a die making factory. So it's a huge, huge system. And I call this system of all the technologies depending on each other, the technium, to distinguish it from technology. But it's the technosphere, it's the system of these technologies. And what we know from making systems ourselves, either computer systems, complicated factories, is that when you have a very, very large system with thousands, if not millions of parts, these systems, they have tendencies, they have urgencies, they have what they often called strange attractors. If you do them 1,000 times, they tend to repeat certain patterns. They tend to go into certain relationships that are easier than others. And so these tendencies in the system is what I call the wants. In the same way that a plant system tends towards light. You could say it wants light. It's not conscious, but it'll do everything it can to lean into the light, to seek the light out. It wants light. And in the same ways, these systems, these technological systems, technium, has certain wants, and they're not necessarily conscious, but they're built in. They're like reflexes. They're like urges. They're a bias. Given all the other things, they'll tend to go in this way. And so that means that this system, this very sophisticated system of technology that we've made around our lives, has certain tendencies that are independent of us. And the question is, well, what are they? That's what I attempt to answer is saying that if we have this evolutionary-like system that's producing, with our efforts, producing certain things, there may be certain tendencies in it that we should be aware of, that we should reckon with. And my stronger hypothesis is that if we can identify those tendencies, we can work with them. And it's particularly important if we're trying to do something that's sort of against the grain. It's like having a piece of wood. If you're going to make something out of wood, you want to know what the tendencies of the wood are, what the grains are. You want to work with that rather than against it. So my efforts in the book is trying to identify what would be the systematic tendencies among the system of technology to identify them. And it's interesting that in certain ways, I agree with a lot of the critics of technology or other people who say that the problem with the technology is that there's tendencies and it's not a matter of limiting it. We have to eliminate it completely. The difference between me and those kind of critics is I think in general, these tendencies are positive for us rather than negative. So I just want to be clear that the idea of tendencies is not just from the boosters of technology, but even the critics.
But for many people, when you use language, metaphorical language, like technology wants certain things, many people will take that metaphor a bit more literally and think of technology, A, as becoming conscious, and B, or particular technologies becoming conscious, and B, as taking over and turning us into like cattle.
Yeah. Well, that may happen. With artificial intelligence, that is the debate right now, is whether or not we make a technology system that currently has no will, purpose, awareness, conscious. But we might give it that over time. And I would say if we do, we have to be very careful about it. But to date, there is no consciousness to that want. The want is closer to the primitive want of an organism to reproduce or to get food.
Kevin, can I now start getting into particular emerging technologies? Let me briefly give a list of some of the things that crossed my mind when we first started thinking about this discussion. I mean, artificial intelligence, of course, new technologies on health and aging that might extend our lives or keep us healthy for much longer, ways of coping with climate change, new forms of warfare. I mean, smart drones terrify me. New forms of space travel, forms of bioengineering that may change human bodies so that they are better adapted to living on Mars or one of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn. Fusion energy, quantum computing, biotechnology, agricultural advancements, robotics, de-extinction, and so on and so on and so on. Now, of all of these, which would you pick as the most significant technologies that are emerging right now?
As you know, there's a lot of hubbub and hysteria, panic and excitement for artificial intelligence. And I agree that this is the most potent of them. It's what we call an enabling technology, meaning that many of the other things you just mentioned in your list can't really happen unless we have AI first.
So the steam engine, sorry to interrupt, but the steam engine was an enabling technology that enabled so many of the transitions of the Industrial Revolution.
Or electricity is another enabling technology. Mathematics. So this is AI is a very fundamental enabling technology that will enable many advances in biotech, in material science, etc. As we unroll it, we can apply it to these other areas and make very rapid advances in them. So it is by far the most powerful set that we can see right now. And I would also say, by the way, if it turns out that it's very slow in coming, it would also mean none of these other things would be slow in coming too. It really is enabling, but it's also kind of like a gating technology where we actually do need it to do some of these other things. It would be very, very hard, particularly some of the biological research, to make the kind of advances that we imagine curing cancer without these artificial minds. So the way I describe it is that the possibility space of possible minds is very, very large. There are probably thousands, if not millions, of different ways of thinking. Different intelligence is not a element; it's a compound made up of elements of cognition, and you can combine them in many, many ways. And they've been combined into our weird kind of mind, which is on the map of all possible minds on the edge somewhere. And what it is there are lots of problems that we have, like quantum gravity or other things that are probably not solvable by ourselves. Our own minds are probably not capable of solving it. We need to actually invent, in the two-step process, we need to invent some other kinds of thinking to work together so that together we can solve these problems. So there are a lot of things that we want to do that we actually need to invent other kinds of minds to work with us to solve them. And so that is the kind of power. That kind of power could be very scary. Consciousness is another kind of an element that may or may not be present in them. But we know from humans that once you add consciousness, lots of weird things can happen. They can be deceitful. They can have their own agenda, and they could be out of our control. So we have to really enter that with great caution. And I would say we are doing that right now. The good news is that it's going very slowly. As a society, we have time to incorporate this and make the adjustments and to reconceive it, to re-engineer it. The one image, the one story, the one Hollywood story where this happens instantly within a flick of fingers, where suddenly we make an AI that makes another AI that makes one even smarter, and that happens overnight. That's just a romantic Hollywood story. There's no evidence that even such a thing like that could happen, even though we could imagine it. It's like Superman. We can imagine it, but it doesn't mean you can have superpowers. So this is a kind of a romantic fantasy, this idea of instant super intelligence. It will happen slowly if it happens, giving us time to adjust to the kinds of concerns that people have.
That's a very optimistic account. I'm more optimistic than some of the accounts that I've been reading at the moment, which see it as a kind of, train that's coming towards us at a terrifying speed, far faster than we can cope. I love the idea that perhaps AI can help us solve not just technological problems, but scientific problems. You mentioned quantum gravity, that it may help us solve some of the mysteries that we still face in looking at the world today.
Well, we have the greatest mystery, which is sitting right at the top of our neck, which we have no idea how our own minds work. We have no idea sometimes even what we think. And so AI also has the possibility of helping us solve that problem of understanding humans.
Most of the really big mysteries sit in the future. So I wonder if I can take you into the future, which is where we can be certain we don't really know what we're talking about. If we move to larger time scales, say 30 years or 100 years, I believe you're spending a lot of time at the moment thinking about the 100-year time scale. Can we move on to the scale of 100 years? And then I'd like you to push you to even longer time scales, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years. What sort of technologies do you see emerging? And a related question, which is, are you broadly optimistic about the future?
Let me start with the broad one. I am radically optimistic. I'm probably the most optimistic person you will meet. And that's because I deliberately choose to be more optimistic every day. Optimism is a choice. It's not necessarily a temperament. So I choose to be more optimistic, and I choose to be optimistic because everything good in this world today, if we look around your room, wherever you are, whatever listener, look around the room, and all the good things that you might assign in your room were all made by optimistic people who believed in something that few other people believed could happen. So the world has been made and shaped by the optimists of the past. And it will be the optimists of the future who believe in things that are going to shape the future. And I want to be one of those. So that's why I choose to be optimistic, because it requires imagining something first in order to make something complicated happen. You have to imagine it and believe that it can be possible. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. So, yes, I am optimistic. In the 100-year frame, let me say one thing that may be shocking, which is that most of the things in 100 years are going to be old stuff. It's going to be the same stuff. I would say, 95% of the stuff in 100 years will be exactly the same stuff we have right now. Most of your brain and my brain is reptilian. There's only a very thin layer of modern conscious layer. It's a small percentage of your brain that is different from even the primate brain. And so most of the stuff in the future is going to be, I would say, if you walked into a city 100 years, it will look very, very familiar. Probably a lot of the same buildings still there, probably the same streets, probably the same plumbing. We have this idea of pace layers, that things change at different rates, but the infrastructural things change very, very slowly. And most of the world is infrastructure that we don't see. And so technologies succeed by becoming invisible, and most of the stuff in our lives is invisible because it works. It only makes visible when it breaks. So let me just say that in 100 years from now, most of the stuff is going to be very similar to what we have now. Though we'll be 5% different, and that 5% is going to be very meaningful to us. It's going to be very important. The way I say it's like, you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of kind of the basic needs and things. Well, most of the things that are changing are at the higher level. They're like what it means to us. What's our identity? How do we spend our day? Whereas the basic support systems are going to be pretty much the same. There will be innovations here and there in them, of course, but they aren't going to be revolutionary. We had the Industrial Revolution. It already happened. All the atoms have been rearranged. Most of the changes in the future are going to be in the intangible arena, things that are much more intangible, things like your health, your communications, your idea of how you spend your time. It's in the intangible. Of course, we're going to have robots and others doing that work, but the real changes are going to be in a realm beyond just the rearranging the atoms in the world. So what do I see in 100 years? I think things like, let's take agriculture, using biological organisms to take solar energy and turn it into materials because they can do it on their own. It's like having self-running factories, self-reproducing factories will be really, really important still. We'll use technologies to breed better versions of them. We'll use AI technology to make what they call precision agriculture. Most of the work will be done by robots, and they will be attending each plant individually. Each corn plant out of the zillions planted every year will be remembered uniquely and given the right amount of fertilizer and pesticides, whatever it is, for that particular corn plant, so it can maximize its yield. And so the idea of using solar energy to make stuff will not go away, but will be much, much more efficient, much more better. We can grow other things besides just food. We can grow fibers, new kind of fibers that are completely engineered from scratch. We can grow materials that we use for construction in the same way. So that's one example of a 100-year future.
So that's you've talked about protopian futures, which I understand to mean futures that are not utopian. They're not unrealistic. These are realistic futures where there are still many problems of many kinds, but by and large, pretty good futures for large numbers of human beings. Can I push you beyond 100 years and ask you, if you think it's even worth thinking about what the world may look like in 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years.
I don't know. So I don't have visions of the very far future, other than I would say retreat back to this Technium view, which is that I suspect that we will speciate as a species, meaning that there will be some humans who will be very eager to modify their genes and their soulmate genes and their children in the future. And there are going to be other humans, like the Amish, who would say, under no circumstances will I or our family or our descendants ever modify their genes. And so there'll be a division, a fork, where you have the naturals, people who won't change, and you have a lot of other who are changing very rapidly and maybe supplementing themselves with technology, cyborgian. So I would expect that there will species, that there'll be multiple varieties of humans, and that will cause a lot of problems because they'll have speciesism. One of the reasons why today's dogma of overcoming racism is that we can say with great confidence that everybody on our planet is basically genetically the same. We are the same. There really isn't an us and them. We're so closely related in terms of our genes. It makes the idea of us and them a fiction. However, if you do actually have different species, then there is us and them. And that is a very terrifying thought, because you can say, well, they do that and we don't do that. That's what I call protopia, meaning that there are going to be a lot of future problems. It's not utopian. So speciation is, I think, in the cards for that. And when we start to talk about our future, the question is going to be, who's our?
Kevin, I'm going to take that response to me trying to push you into the remote future as a way of saying, let's be realistic, that some of the mysteries really are mysteries. And I appreciate your caution. I'd like to end by asking you what you're working on right now.
Yeah. So I have this idea of the 100-year desirable future, which is a project trying to describe a 100-year future that I would like to live in personally. So it's not trying to predict what will happen. It's much more of a sense of trying to suggest what could happen or what we would like to happen. So it's a positive scenario. I'm trying to make it as much as possible a coherent scenario, meaning that if you, in 100 years, if you have X technology, that would mean you could also do Y. And that if you could do Y, then you could do Z. And so you would have this thing. And then finally, it has a history. In other words, it has 10-year increments of how we get there. Meaning that if you could do Y in 100 years, then can you do half Y at 50 years? And if you can do half Y at 50 years, then what else can you do? So part of the problem of most science fiction stories is that they're not very consistent. So I'm trying to make a plausible, coherent version of a positive scenario of a place, a world that I would like to live in. And so it has ubiquitous, cheap AI agents everywhere, always on. It has constant monitoring. Everything is monitored because we have these virtual worlds that look at us and every motion that we do. But a lot of that can be used into making some of the best medicine in the world, because we have millions of people's actual behaviors that we can use to model how medicines work or don't. And it's a world, I think, on this planet, primarily powered by the sun, some nuclear and stuff, but we stopped burning carbon. In fact, I just talked to a guy yesterday who was talking about e-biology, using electricity to directly generate proteins and other things with the help of biological organisms. It's kind of an alternative to the natural photosynthesis system that we have, but we can actually use electricity into these systems that produce protein or pharmaceuticals or other kinds of things using electric in an alternative to photosynthesis. And that, given what he's reported, could be available in 100 years. 100 years, I think we would have cures for cancer, all cancer vaccine. We would have, everybody would be sequenced at birth. We would have quantified self, allowing personal therapies, personal medicines printed in response to how your body performed the previous day. So you would get doses that were titrated to the performance of yesterday. So I think probably increasing longevity, but not, maybe to 120, maybe 110. That's what I'm working on is trying to make a vision, because my hypothesis is that I don't think we can arrive at a complicated world full of technology that it is a positive world accidentally. I think we actually have to try to imagine it first. And I'm trying to imagine it. And maybe you don't like mine, which is fine, then imagine your own. But we need to imagine that world in order to try to aim for it. In the same way that the Star Trek people imagined the hand communicated, which was an inspiration for people making a phone. They say, oh, I get that. That's what I want. And so we want to have a vision of the future, and we're saying, I want to try and make that happen.
Taking the long view and thinking optimistically is what big historians love to do. This discussion has certainly made me feel a lot better about technology and the future. I was getting a little worried that our AI overlords would make us all pets. Want to learn more about the universe, the origins of humanity, and what the future might hold? Check out the other episodes of Unknowns, in which we explore mysteries and questions about our origins and our future. Interested in learning more about Big History? Check out the Big History Project, a free online course for middle school and junior high students.